Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. It's brilliant to have you with me, with us, with our team here, putting on these seminars for you. And it's my pleasure, Dr. Kath Bishop, I'm here with you for an hour to talk about this vitally important topic of resilience. Now, it's a big abstract term and it's everywhere. Our environment needs to be resilient. We need to be resilient against terrorism. We need to be resilient in sport. We need to be resilient in the military. And of course, now over this last year, 18 months, we've been thinking about resilience in the face of a pandemic. And there is one profession above all that has accrued experience like no other. So I come with my stories to share, but I know a lot of you have got some stories to share as well. I've been fascinated in this topic through the decades of different careers that I've had. Firstly, as an Olympic oarswoman, as a rower, I went to 3 Olympic Games, and that world of high performance sport got me really interested in what are the things that help us to thrive, what are the things that help us to manage pressure, and what are the things that help us to be at our best over a sustained period of time. And I realized that it often wasn't the things that I first thought. And the culture and the environments in sport are changing a lot as we understand more about performance. So I see resilience and performance as going hand in hand and are really important for us to think about how can we be at our best. I then had a career as a diplomat in the British Foreign Office, working as a diplomat in lots of conflict affected parts of the world. I became a specialist in stabilization policy, which is what was the sort of world of policy that we brought into things in order to help us to get civilians to be able to manage some really hostile environments. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we learnt from that world where we faced all sorts of threats. I'm a parent, and I work with organizations as a coach, and again, always talking about this theme. It's been very prevalent over recent months, both at an organizational level, a team level, a personal level. So there's probably lots of things that I'll bring today that aren't entirely new, but because resilience is quite a complex concept, we need to make sense of it for ourselves. And so that's really what I hope we can do a bit today, is to further our understanding, our thinking about this topic and how we apply it into our own lives. Now, I know there are hundreds of you on this call, and I want to tap into some of that experience that you bring as well. So first of all, find the Q&A box, and I'd like to hear from you. Can you give me a word or a phrase that sums up what resilience means to you? So we're going to see the Q&A box now, I think, go crazy. And I want to see actually, what are the words? What does it mean for you? What do you connect this abstract word with? Share a bit of that so we can also connect across the audience today as well with what this topic means to us, what your thoughts are, and how you see it. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of that vocabulary, some of those concepts that are probably going to be part of what we discuss today. So share your thoughts now about what does resilience mean to you? That's great to see some coming down. I'm going to have to scroll down to kind of see all of these. Loving that language coming in there. Bouncing back, surviving, coping. These are all the sorts of words that we hear. Mental strength, flexibility. Anna, I'm loving that. I'm going to come back to that really soon. Yeah, this recovery piece, peace and calm. Yeah, God, don't we all long for that? Again, that coping word. I'm loving this. So all of these things, I can't possibly read them all out, but this is all of us making sense. And everything you put in the chat is right. These are all parts of resilience. So that tells us from the start that this is quite a complex concept. This is not about something simple. And again, that's why we need to make sense of what does it mean for us. It's dynamic as a concept. It's changing all the time. I'm loving seeing coming in there. Yeah, the self-belief, that self-belief piece and asking for help. Yeah, I mean, all of these concepts that are coming in here, I mean, you yourselves have in the chat function, have in the Q&A, kind of started to write a mini booklet about what resilience is about. It's not simple. It's dynamic because it changes all the time. So with all of the experiences that we have, We are constantly developing, making sense of those experiences and stories, and that adds to our resilience. So it's a complex concept, it's dynamic, and it's personal. My resilience looks different from your resilience because I've been through different stories and had different experiences along the way. So again, we have to think about actually, what is it that it means to us? So I'm loving all of those. Great. I don't know if we can capture this. Tobin is helping out with all the tech because, actually you're creating a sort of NHS definition of what resilience means. So my next question to you all is, you have been experiencing and developing resilience over recent months. Where does it come from? That's what I'd love to hear from you. Where does it come from? Because again, that's something we want to look at today. So yeah, being able to process, Susan, I love that. What's going on and keep functioning effectively. Great. Where do we get it from? I love that collectively we're sort of stretching the possibilities of Microsoft Teams Q&A by asking such a large audience. Yeah, strength through challenge, great. Health is an important part, experiences that we have. So again, thinking about, and I'm using what's called the live Q&A box. So I know some of you perhaps on mobiles finding that harder to find. Again, where it's coming from inside us, it's internal. Again, it's complex, it's not one place. It actually comes from all sorts of different aspects. So there are different things we can do to develop it. And that's, again, what we're going to have a little bit of a look through today. Brilliant. Thank you so much for engaging, because by being interactive, I'm sorry I can't be present with you all today, but by really thinking about it, it helps us, again, to make sense. And that's how we move on, that kind of psychological piece. Brilliant. I'm loving all of that. The environment is so important. That's such a great comment there. Yeah, our peers, the support, the circumstances, absolutely vital, as well as the internal resources. It's what's around us. Catherine, yeah, how we think, a positive thinking, mental flexibility is really important. Energy, Claire, absolutely love that as well. So I'm going to get Tobin, who's helping with some slides, to put up the slides. I'm going to create a little bit of structure to kind of give us a working definition for what we're going to look at today, and then I'm going to feed some of my stories into that. So if we can go to the next slide, one of the key concepts that's come out around resilience, and I've sort of looked at research that goes across healthcare, goes across sort of looking at mental, the sort of mental health side of things, how people manage grief, how they manage bereavement, trauma, natural disasters, how the military are rethinking how they train and prepare for pressure in the light of what they've learned about post-traumatic stress disorder, and how athletes learn to perform. So there's a wide body of fascinating research and some really common themes, unsurprisingly, across all of those. And if we go to the next slide, Tobin, then this is what I think is perhaps the key concept to focus on in terms of resilience, and it is this adaptability piece, the flexibility, which came up in some of your descriptions there, that is so important. And there can be a bit of an old-fashioned view that we focus on strength and just sort of, coping, if you like, in a sort of, I'm dealing with everything that's coming towards me, and that's all I can manage. But we get stuck if that's our only response. Actually, developing resilience is being able to move through that, changing in some way. It's that transformation you can see described here in Carol Pemberton, who's studied research and worked in organizations. There's a lot of coaching of top business leaders. It's that flexibility in our thinking when we're under massive pressure, so that somehow we come out of this and we've adapted, we've grown, we're wiser, we're more able in some way. And once we start capturing that adaptability piece, then we've got movement, we've got momentum, and we've stopped being stuck. So a really kind of piece to hold on to and to ask yourselves after today is, I'm coping with things, but how am I adapting? What am I doing different in order to manage this in a better way and almost move beyond that coping, which I know can seem absolutely, almost impossible. That's where the growth comes, and that's where we then start to recover, if you like, and recover our energy as well. If we look at the next slide, Tobin, this is all of the different places from which we can get resilience. And the blue boxes are the ones that we can still have an influence on, we can still develop, we can very much develop. And that's, again, I want us to see resilience as something that's very dynamic, that we can do things to develop. It's not innate. Now, the two greyed out boxes are the things that we can't do much about. They are important. Well, one of those is really important and one of those is less important. So the genes piece, the good news is what you inherit, it's very tiny in terms of how it affects our resilience. Now, I'm so aware, I'm facing all of these medical experts, so I'm not going to go into any genetic science here, but we basically, there's a range of norms within which one of us might have slightly more neuroplasticity than the next, and within which, again, we might just have a slightly, what we would see, a sunnier mood and an optimistic mood, because we might have a bit more dopamine that we create naturally, but it's all within a really, really tiny norm. So basically, we don't need to worry about the genetic piece. This is not innate. There's an enormous amount that we can do to develop resilience. The other factor grayed out is the childhood, and that is huge. It has a huge impact on us, those safe experiences of bonds with those around us, how we feel safe and secure. That has a huge impact on how we manage challenges as a child and how we then manage challenges later on. So, we take a lot of that with us. We can still develop and work with that and become conscious of how it's affected us, and we don't have to carry on the same, but it definitely has a really big impact on us. So just to be aware of those two. But otherwise, today, all of our thinking is on the blue boxes. And have a think, which of these do you spend most time, are you most active in developing your resilience, and which one perhaps least of all? Do you spend most of your time thinking about, making sure you've got the support networks, or focusing on the health and well-being? Again, just have a think about, maybe there's an area that, I'm not capitalizing on. And so we're going to be looking at these areas. I'm not going to go massively into the health and well-being piece, because we understand the fitness needs, the nutrition needs, the sleep needs. And actually, it's often the way we think as psychology that's key to whether we're actually doing those things and prioritizing those things and making them happen and feeling we can look after ourselves and care for ourselves. So purpose and meaning is a huge source of energy to get through difficult times. Basic behavioral psychology tells us that if we know the why, then when we hit a hurdle, we'll find a way around it. We become resourceful, we become creative, we become resilient in the face of setbacks. If we're not sure why, then we don't. Now, you have a clearer why than almost any profession has. But there's still scope to connect that to what you're doing, to be aware of the meaning of what you're doing, and to think about how some of the mundane challenges each day connect to that, to use that in your language to kind of derive some energy from the fact that you're doing such incredible work that makes a difference to people. And sometimes we can almost take it for granted when you're working in a profession like you are, where it's so obvious that you are contributing to society, to contributing and changing people's lives for the better, that you can almost overlook it. So yourselves making that personal connection to it is really important on a day-to-day basis to get the energy and the resource that comes from that. I mean, that is undoubtedly what's underpinned so much of what we have seen in terms of how the medical profession have adapted and coped with the incredible challenges thrown at them. Relationships are really important. Resilience is a team sport. It's not something we can do on our own. So, it's all of the literature shows that sort of social capital is really important. But the thing to think about there is the quality of the social support. Are you broadening and deepening your relationships? Are you really connecting with people and investing in those relationships so that when we have difficult times, then we've got the support network there. It's too late to, or it's unhelpful to be starting to build it when we get to that point. And certainly in my work as a diplomat and my work and my experience as an athlete, we massively prioritize the relationships in those worlds, because that's what made things work. In fact, it's what makes things work in most of our lives. So again, it's, thinking about, am I really prioritizing that? We can often live in a world where we focus on tasks rather than people. And I think it's really important to focus on that. And Kirsten asks a great question about, are we missing out on the social support? Certainly it feels different. And of course, we're missing out on face-to-face contact. But if we've been investing in developing really strong relationships, through our lives up to this point, then we have that network to call on. We have those people around us. and we need to make sure that we're perhaps being, as creative as possible. It's not just Zoom meetings, or if we're on a Zoom meeting, we're actually paying attention rather than scrolling through our phone at the same time. And we have more communication tools than ever before, and yet you're right, there's a lot of loneliness that's written about that is an epidemic almost in itself. So we have to be thoughtful about how we create the social support, what social support we need. Again, that looks different for each of us. And what are our opportunities? We can't do some of the obvious stuff. That doesn't mean we can't do a lot of other thoughtful things to support people. Great question. Psychological flexibility is one of those areas that, as an athlete, we spent a lot of time developing, because we have sports psychologists and coaches, and it's almost like we're allowed to talk about it. And often that's the area where we could make much bigger inroads into developing resilience, by seeing the importance of, looking after ourselves, that self-compassion, that voice in our head that takes care of ourselves rather than just being a critical voice. Making sure that we have that kind of openness to learning, to adapting, even when we're exhausted from all of the challenges. That's really helps us to get that sense of adapting and moving through. So I see psychological flexibility as really key to make sure we're proactively developing that. We are learning. All of you coming today to hear a different voice and some different stories. That hopefully some questions that you'll take away and will provoke your thoughts a little bit. Good. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I've got one more model that sort of sets up this world, I hope bringing some different aspects on understanding what this big abstract term really means. And I love this model. It's not just because it's a brilliant Scottish researcher, Jenny Campbell, who's written about it in her work with organisations and research about the resilience dynamic, but because it makes so much sense when I heard it, and it kind of gave me one of those breakthrough moments, if you like, that often we see resilience in two levels. So if you could just click the next couple of levels, we have that sort of awful breakdown point where things have gone wrong and we're kind of at a burnt out level. Can you click that one through? Is that coming? Yeah, there we go. Is it being a little slow? Perfect. And then the next level is this break-even level. And now a lot of us are in this at the moment. We're coping. Coping was a word that a lot of you used. And it's certainly better than being in a breakdown state. It means we're keeping going for now. We think about bouncing back. And if somebody says, how are you? You say, oh, I'm okay. But essentially we feel quite stuck. We feel, really exhausted. We're often not looking after our well-being and caring for ourselves enough. And we're sort of getting by through adrenaline and deadlines. And it's important to see that that is not where resilience starts and finishes. We actually want to be thinking about the next level. So if we could click the next level. Breakthrough is where we want to get through, where we're able to resource ourselves. And it comes back to those blue boxes we looked at before. We've got purpose and meaning in what we're doing. And we have this sense of what success looks like that's defined by us, not by others. And this is a topic that I've spent, several years thinking, researching and writing about, and a couple of decades of experiencing. How we define success often creates a particular experience that can be energizing and positive, or threatening and very frightening. And it's really important that we understand, to be resilient, we need to be thinking of success in a way that's on our own terms, that's linked to that purpose, our values, the things that have lasting value beyond any short-term metrics that come into play. For an athlete, it's winning medals. In businesses and even in your world, there are targets to be met. These are short-term metrics that it's the why do we want to achieve those metrics in order to achieve something of greater value? That's what we want to connect with. That learning mindset, the flexibility piece, the curiosity. Again, we're starting to resource ourselves and create some energy for ourselves rather than constantly draining it each day, trying to top up overnight and going again, which brings a sort of ever diminishing cycle. So, of course, we're moving up and down. We're not always in breakthrough. We're not always in break even. And hopefully we're not going too far down to breakdown. But to be thinking about, what am I doing? What am I investing in order to move closer to that breakthrough level of resilience? That's a question that I'd love you to take away and think about a bit today. Great. If we move on to the next slide, in the process of thinking about resilience, performance, leadership, success. There is this huge overlapping area that we'll see and that I want us to think about today. So if we can click through the slide, first of all, thinking about our mindset, our behaviours and our relationships. These are aspects that contribute enormously to what we do, and yet we don't always develop them proactively. We look at the tasks, we look at the calendar, we look at the things that are scheduled, but how we turn up is something that is within our control. Resilience is largely about sort of focusing on the things within our control, something as athletes that we focus on. We can't just work harder to go faster, we have to get smarter about how we can improve our performance, because we always want to get faster. And we spend a lot of time investing and developing in our mindset, the way we think, so that when we turn up under massive pressure at the Olympics or the World Championships, we're ready to perform. We're able to deliver our best because we've practiced it, we've learned about it, and we're not suddenly thrown off. Our behaviours, again, have a huge impact on the way we think and the way others think around us, the experience we have and others have. So again, let's be very intentional about those. And then the third thing is the area of relationships, how we interact. We cannot succeed alone. So let's make sure those relationships are at the forefront of what we do and not an afterthought. And I think some of that sort of social support that Kirsten was referencing in her question there, where, you know, we're sort of missing out on it. It's because we haven't always had it as the priority. And suddenly we realise now we really need this to get through this challenging time. Do you know what? We need that social support to get through any time and to be at our best. So putting these things first for me is this is the hidden world of resilience that as sports people we spend a lot of time investing in. And again, in my work as a diplomat, connecting with people across all sorts of barriers, trying to manage all sorts of challenging situations. You know, once you get inside the negotiating room, it's not about how smart you are, how intelligent you are as a diplomat, how well you've read your technical papers and your briefings and read your history books. It's about how you connect with other people in that room. It's about how you connect with the way they think, the way they behave, and how you interact with them and create a new dynamic in order to move this little part of the world that you're thinking about and talking about and negotiating one step further forward. So I put around this the 3 C's, if we can click one further on, of clarity, constant learning and connection, which is for me what I call the long win. Okay, I'm not about sort of trying to, go for just winning the next race at all costs, getting the results at all costs, because the costs are too high and the costs affect what come thereafter. We have seen lots of athletes, even when they win, feeling, dismay and depression and emptiness on the top step of the podium because they stopped connecting that medal to what really mattered. They stopped linking it to what was going to happen in life thereafter. And then there's enormous crash. And that's even just the winners. Imagine what some of the others are left thinking when they've put everything in this basket of results at all costs. So having a much more sustainable way of defining what matters to us becomes really important. And that's the concept of the long win. So if we look at clarity, first of all, then I'm going to ask you some questions again. So I'm going to get ready for that Q&A to go bonkers again, which I'm loving. One of the first questions that I want to ask you, when clarity is about developing different layers, it's not one thing. It's not I wake up in the morning, I've got clarity, perfect clarity. It develops over life, it develops over time. So I want it to be very much an emergent, creative, ongoing concept for us, that we clarify the things that are important to us, and we clarify how we turn up, and we clarify, the values that are most important to us, and it shifts through life. So the first question that Tobin's going to put up in a moment I'd like you to answer is, what are the things that get you out of bed in the morning? Now, before you go bonkers on the Q&A, I'm going to ban a few answers. So I don't want to hear about coffee. I don't want to hear about pets and children and partners. I don't want to hear about the alarm clock, even though these are part of the kind of the automatic world, the surface level world. I want to hear from you. What are the things that you look forward to in the day? What are the things that make it worthwhile getting up? What are the things that energize you when you think about the day ahead? So I'm looking forward to hearing what are the things that get you out of bed in the morning. Here we go. Yeah, making a difference. Nice. I like that language. Yeah. Curiosity and expectation. Brilliant. Connection with others. So, you know, you're right. That connection piece, that social piece, we are social creatures. It's so important to us. Every day is a school day. Yep, I hear that, particularly with homeschooling at the moment. Yeah, so what's really important is taking a moment here, loving these. Yeah, long walk in the country, achieving at work, colleagues, brilliant. I love that language. Again, you know, that little snapshot of these are the things that matter to us. This for me is a really important success metric, far beyond, you know, all of the other objectives that we have, that we need to have in order to function in our organizations. But actually, you know, these are the things that are important. And one of you asked about how do we support resilience in others? Well, it's about understanding what do others, what are their drivers? What are the things that are important to them? Learning, experiencing new things. Yeah, that's absolutely key. And for me, a huge, huge motivator for me as well. If I'm working in a team, when I was working in a sports team, these are the questions I want to know, not what's on someone's CV, not just sort of the job title. I want to know what's the stuff that really matters to them, that, you know, brings out the best in them, that drives them, that taps into that kind of intrinsic, that deeper level of energy. Before I can work in a team with someone, I want to know these things. I also want to know how they're going to react. It's going to tell me stuff about them. When we worked when I was training as in an Olympic crew in the rowing world, then it was really important that we understood the why. Why did we want to go fast? It wasn't enough that we were just all wanting to win. That was just a surface level. What was really interesting was when we got to the level of why were we there? Why did we want to win? Why did it matter to us? Why were we training 3 times a day? So 6 hours of physical training, 7 days a week, 49 weeks of the year. And of course, we all had very different personal answers to this. And understanding that gave us an insight into each other. For example, you know, there would be situations where we'd lose a race and one person in the crew would be crying their eyes out and another person in the crew would be going, great, now I know what to do. We're going to do something different next time. Because we understood who we were and the different drivers and the different motivations we had, it stopped us falling into judgment at that moment of thinking, gosh, that person doesn't care because they're not crying, or gosh, that person's no help, they're crying and not thinking about what to do to move forward. So really understanding that kind of the individual strengths that we bring to what we do that make us who we are at a deeper level than just our job title is a really important part of clarifying who we are and who the people are around us that we're working with. And once we start to get that bigger, greater sense of who we are, what matters to us, then we can think outside ourselves. So the next question, Tobin, is to think about, you know, what's our purpose? What's that bigger difference? And you've already spoken, you know, brilliantly in the chat about those things that are important to you, and that sense of, you know, the contribution you make through your profession. I want to move on to the next question. I mean, do for yourselves take a moment to jot a phrase down or think about how would you articulate your purpose, the difference that you want to make. Don't assume that I've got the language or that it's so obvious in your profession. What is it that your job and your role actually, what's the difference you want to make? Great. Let's go on to the next question. How we think about success, you know, in a way that we can control. For me, this was a game changer. I had 2 Olympic Games where I didn't perform brilliantly. I came 7th in the first, and then I came 9th after training another 4 years of 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, 49 weeks of the year. You know, I'd managed to go slower. How was that possible? And it was because I wasn't looking at this much broader world of performance, of thinking beyond the obvious physical stuff, of thinking about investing in mindset, in recovery, in, you know, the way I was behaving and the relationships I had within that high performance world. And I realized that there was a much broader world. The psychologist that you know, started to work with me when I decided to come back for a 3rd Olympics was also part of a bit of a revolution in sports psychology that was happening at that time, about 20 years ago now, where athletes start to focus on their performance and separate out the concepts of performance and results. We all want good results, that hasn't changed, but we can't control that because there are a number of external factors involved. In sport, it's about you know, the weather, umpires, referees and competitors that we can't control. In your world, though, again, will be lots of external factors. So as an athlete, although I want to get the best result, thinking about the result doesn't help me. What I need to think about are what are all the elements that contribute to that, and how can I improve those? And that's my performance. So, again, I can think about the result, what does it look like? Going faster than the rest of the world in the beautiful lake in 3 or 4 years time at the next Olympics or at the World Championships. How do I connect that to today, a day in February when it's freezing cold and I'm not going faster than the rest of the world? But how can I make today a successful day? I need to maximize today and tomorrow and the day after in order to reach that higher level of performance in due course. So we would start to define success on a daily basis with around all of the things that we can control. And we look at all of those elements. Some are not that easy to measure, but they're all part of that peak performance I'm building towards. So therefore I need to include those in what I do today. So as well as all the things of how fast I go, how strong I am in the gym and how much weight I lift and all of those scores that I get, it's also about how I develop my communication. Because under pressure in an Olympic final, I need to be able to communicate in a peak, almost telepathic way. As I'm sure many of you have had some extremely stressful situations over the last year, where because of your training and connection with colleagues, you you already know what they're thinking. You're able to react that bit faster and that bit much more closely synchronized. So thinking about what are all of the elements I need to do to improve. And it becomes a world where we want to be world class at improving as an athlete. Not world class at winning, not because we don't want to win, we want to win as much as ever. But the way to optimize that is to focus on this improvement process, this learning process, all of these small things that I can do better today than I did yesterday, including collaboration, looking after myself, eating well, things that may not get measured, but are absolutely critical to me being at my best. So that sense of defining success on your own terms on a daily basis, tied up with that bigger purpose over the longer term, gives us this long stretch of time, if you like, from which we can think and situate ourselves. We're not just looking towards the next term, the next short-term target, which sometimes our organizations are things that they're measuring us on most obviously. We can think about how can I have a good day today when it's not about a result or a score, because there are no scores today. How do I turn up at my best and improve a little bit on what I did yesterday? And that's the heart of a performance mindset, if you like, that we develop in sport in order to get the best out of ourselves. And it means we're also able to keep learning, keep the focus on that, regardless of results. So if we allow ourselves to, feel terrible if we lose and spend time doing that, which is what the old sporting culture used to be about. If you're a true winner, then you're really miserable if you lose. And if you don't mind too much when you lose, then you can't be a winner. All of that sort of mantra that in fact still exists in some parts of sport, that doesn't actually help us to learn and be resilient and move on, because we're not learning enough. We need to learn when we win, we need to learn when we lose, and that creates a constancy. So we do the same thing, we analyse. It's also stupid not to analyse when we win all the good things that we did well. When I win a race, I want to look at what's worked, what I need to improve and what I need to do differently. And when I lose a race, I need to do exactly the same. Think about, what am I doing well? What do I need to change? What am I going to do differently tomorrow? And this creates that kind of resilience, if you like, that when you lose, you don't go on a roller coaster of everything's great when you win and everything's terrible when you lose. You create this constant learning that regardless of results, I'm still learning something that I didn't know before I raced this weekend. And that's what helps us to kind of build performance in a constant way, because of course it's not a linear process. So let's get good at the improving, and let's have that as part of our success metric, if you like, to make sure that we really can tap into that. Great. So the last question that I like to ask as well about clarifying is the experience. Because actually, who wants, we've seen people kind of win gold medals and hate it and never want to be involved in sport again. Well, in my mind, that's not a picture of success. I want people who have, had a good experience, they're going to tell a good story, they're going to help the next generation, they're going to invest back in sport, or they're going to take that story with them into whatever happens next in their lives. For me, experiences and stories are who we are and what matters most. And they're certainly one of our best tools in learning and becoming resilient and making sense of the good and the bad experiences that happen to us. So to be quite intentional again, to clarify, what's the experience that you want to have in your incredibly demanding roles in the healthcare profession? And what's the experience you want to create for other people working with you? Because that is also very largely within your control. So be responsible for that. Think about clarifying the experience that we want to have, not just those kind of results at the end of the day or tasks ticked off, but actually, how did I turn up today? How did others experience working with me today? Did I kind of contribute to the environment, the culture we're in positively? Not just did I do all my tasks. Broadening success criteria is really important so that we can then create those environments in which we can manage the challenges and still thrive. Great. Let's move on to, actually, I was going to talk about this. I'm involved with a lovely non-profit called the True Athlete Project, who are starting to support a better framework for elite athletes. So if you can click through this slide, Tobin, often there's the pursuit of winning that's seen in isolation, and we see a huge number, literally kind of 50% of elite athletes suffering with mental health issues in a BBC State of Sport survey a couple of years ago, because they're not developing that rounded picture. And so through the True Athlete Project, we run a mentoring program for athletes and workshops, and these are some of the elements that are also really key ingredients to performance, to thriving, to resilience, making sure we're aware of our values, who we are, and identity beyond the simple role we have. Identity beyond an athlete, for you, identity beyond your jobs. We need to be more than that, even though that may be the all-consuming part of how we spend our lives. We are more than that. We have other interests, we have other connections. Developing compassion in performance is really important in sport, that we get away from this old-fashioned kind of macho culture, where actually we need to be able to be vulnerable as athletes. We need to enable people to, to get out of a fear-based world that leaves us, tense and unable to perform at our best, and change into a much more compassionate, supportive, positive environment where we can look forward to performing, look forward to racing and bring our best, not feel that we're, just solely drawing on a kind of fear of losing. Connectedness to nature, hugely important. And one of the things I loved about my sport of rowing, even when it was going terribly and I was going slow and it felt awful and I was exhausted, was being in a really beautiful natural environment, something I still love about our sport. Mindfulness is also a really important part of tuning in to ourselves, sensing the fatigue, accepting where we are, and then thinking again in competition in sports as well as in training. A really useful tool that's starting to be used a lot more. The military also now really tapping into mindfulness, using that and showing how important that is in helping the state of mind, that psychological flexibility, if you like, for soldiers going into all sorts of horrific situations and then having to manage those afterwards. And our connectedness to communities and that social responsibility piece. Athletes are role models. Actually, all of you are role models. You always have been, but I think you are more than ever over the last year. And that comes with a responsibility that we now look to you for advice, and for your perspective on how we manage this terrible challenge that we've had through the pandemic. Great, let's go on to the second C. So I've sort of talked about clarifying. You can see it's at all different levels. Constant learning is about all sorts of different things as well. If we can go on to the next slide, actually, and just sort of put up that, how open are you to, to really kind of thinking about how we do things differently. Hopefully some of you have come across the concept of a growth mindset and, a fixed mindset, and to be thinking about, what's the language you used? If we're in a fixed mindset, then we hear people saying, oh, that will never work. Oh, tried that before. And that's quite draining to be around. And we also don't adapt. That's stopping us adapting. But we're in the growth mindset, then we're always thinking, oh, how might I do that differently? What alternatives are there? What else could I try? I'm open to feedback. I'm not threatened. When we're fixed, we feel like we've got to prove we've got all the answers. We're proving something, how good we are. That's not helpful to learning. We're in a growth mindset. We're just looking to improve every day through everything we experience. And growth mindset thinking comes from an academic called Carol Dweck, who, so do look up her book called Mindset, and there are lots of TED Talks and videos if you want to think about it more. You may have come across it through schools. It started as an education research around how do we help children to learn best? How do we help them to thrive in their education? Is it about how smart they are? Is it about how well the teachers teach? Actually, it's about the mindset we bring to learning that's really critical. Are we open, or are we afraid of getting things wrong? So there are lots of ways. If we go on to the next slide, Tobin, thanks. We can, there are all sorts of different ways in which we learn. So again, if you can click through this slide and just put them all up there. Again, there's probably some that we do more than others, but a bit of a checklist to think about, how much are you giving yourself some moments to be mindful, to reflect. Are you in a growth mindset? Are there times of the day when under pressure and deadlines can drive us to be very fixed in our thinking, and we need to actually kind of open that up again? Are we asking for feedback? Are we really open to it? Or are we kind of just wanting to continue doing things the way we've always done them? So again, to think about how we use that, the progress principle is about the fact that actually making progress in work that matters is immensely motivating. And when research was done in organisations and work diaries were kept about what are the things that really motivate people at work, it wasn't about hitting targets, winning bonuses, getting sales figures, all of that. It wasn't at all. It wasn't mentioned. On a daily basis, it was about making progress in work that matters. So let's not overlook that huge motivator. Actually recognizing progress. We might not have finished it yet. We might not have got to the kind of end, and it might not kind of all go perfectly. Of course it won't. But you know what? We've made some progress today. Let's stop and recognize that, because that's something that goes home and is hugely motivating to people. They've had a meaningful day. The second thing was nourishing relationships. So again, back into that social support world. Marginal gains thinking is, was a way in which, sports have also looked at these kind of tiny incremental gains all the time to think about actually what are the different ways in which we can go faster. So if we go on to that next slide, I don't know how many of you are sort of marginal gains have read about it, have read about all the sort of different things. The athletes took pillows, if you remember, to competitions in Rio, the Olympic team. Because it improved hygiene, it improved sleep quality, it improved the familiarity, it made you feel at home, stopped you waking up with a crooked neck on the morning of your Olympic final, and more than anything, it was an element of their environment that they could control, where there are lots of things you can't. The flight simulator on the left was something where coaches were taken to talk to the RAF about how they manage decision making under pressure, how they learn to make decisions when they're flying, how they go into a safe space of a simulator where they crash, where they learn about crashing, because you need to know that as part of learning to be a pilot. And coaches talk to them about how they learn to adapt their reactions under pressure, make decisions, another key aspect of high performance. And they went out of the sports world into the the elite world of the Air Force. And the one on the right, well, we all know about that now. We had doctors and nurses come to talk to us as athletes about the importance of washing our hands. This is going back sort of 20 years now. And so we would always do that very thoroughly, because we wanted to minimize the risks of infection, and we wanted to make sure we would avoid public areas as elite athletes, often avoid supermarkets, cinemas, because we didn't want to pick up germs. And that's now actually how the whole population is operating. Great. So, one of the questions for you about in the next slide is just, again, take away that thought of what are your 1%ers? What are those small little things where you might be able to build a little bit more resilience? Again, incremental gains add up to a lot in the end. Lovely. Yeah, let's go on to the next slide. I wanted to talk about an experience I had as a diplomat in, I was the director of something called the Stabilisation Unit in Whitehall, which worked across the international departments for the Foreign Office, the Ministry of Defence, and the Department for International Development, which is now been merged with the Foreign Office. And our challenge was to get more civilians to be able to operate and to be able to manage some complex jobs in really hostile environments. How do we help them beyond their technical expertise? So they might need to be, they might be building a hospital in South Sudan. They might be wanting to work on improving local governance in Afghanistan. I mean, hugely, challenging jobs, but the environments were very threatening as well. And we did some work with occupational psychologists about how we can help people in these environments. And this kind of horrific kind of war-like environment is now, has become much closer to probably some of the things that some of you have experienced over the last period as well. So the first thing is we need to be in a proactively supportive environment. We need to be looking out for each other, not a world where you say, oh, come and tell me if you've got a problem. That's not proactively supportive. We need to be understanding each other so that we know, I know something's not quite right with you today. I can sense that you're a little bit, you're struggling. I'm going to reach out and I'm going to help you. So that's the first thing, which actually was required in the sports world when we were training as well. When we were talking about how we'd work as a team, it was that looking out for each other. So we don't wait for someone to kind of crash or get overtrained. We spot the signs of somebody not quite behaving as they usually would, and we reach out and we give them the support and think about what else can we do to help them. There are then 3 areas which will come as no surprise. So if we click through those, the first is flexibility and adaptability. We are back to that question, that definition we had at the beginning, back to that really important root of developing resilience. In this world of, a volatile war zone, things change overnight. Things are blown up, people you were liaising with, leaders are assassinated, things are so uncertain. And I'm sure in parts of the pandemic, it's perhaps felt like that in your workplaces too. We need to then think, I accept where we are, what can I do next? What can I do next? What's possible now? I can't carry on the project I was doing yesterday, but how can I get water to this city that's cut off? How can I restore, electricity in sufficient numbers now that the electricity generators have been blown up last night? What else can I do? And that's that thinking that we've seen being so incredible in helping us get through this from your profession. The second area is learning about ourselves under pressure. Often we sort of know the kind of person we're like on a normal day, but our behaviour changes when we're under pressure, uncertain, anxious. We need to learn that about ourselves. We need feedback from others. We need to become aware and reflect on how, when it gets too much, how do people around you know? What do they see? What changes? Once we become aware of that, we can start to see the triggers. We can start to manage it. We can start to develop some different responses. We can start to become aware of when we need to take a break or do something different because it's not sustainable anymore. And then the last one is back to the old theme again, social support, really genuine relationships where we really care about each other. That's what's important. Connection is critical. So the last C, we've had clarity, constant learning, connection. It's, resilience is a team sport. We can't do this on our own. And when I was training to be a diplomat, the whole world of diplomacy is about building partnerships, building alliances, often with the unlikeliest of people. We were always taught and would study how can we develop across all sorts of barriers that we would have, linguistic, historical, political, cultural. How can we do that? Before I went on my first diplomatic posting to the beautiful city of Sarajevo, which you can see on the left there, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I was there 10 years after the civil war, so it wasn't a live war, but it's still very much a post-conflict situation. I had a meeting with a very wise and eminent ambassador about, wanted to get his advice really, and I thought he might talk about the geopolitics or the history or different aspects. But he talked to me about connecting with others, and he said this is going to be so important. It doesn't matter who you're talking to, think about how you can connect with them. And the first thing that he said was to make sure that you connect and find out who they are beyond the job title. Doesn't matter if they're a prime minister, a minister, a senior diplomat, or a taxi driver. Find out who they are. Find out what gets them out of bed in the morning. What are the things that are really important to them that they care about? And in order to do that, the second thing you need to do is to listen more than you speak. Our biggest influencing tool is listening. Listening again and listening again. Listening for what we can't hear, listening for the tone of voice, listening for the vocabulary, listening to hear at a much deeper level from people around us. And at that point, then we can do the third element, which is to find out what you have in common and build on that. Find that connection, find that area. So again, my challenge to you when you go back to work this afternoon, when you connect with your colleagues, is, find out something unusual that you might have in common that you don't yet know about the person beside you, that's not about their job title or their job role. Just listen to them. Listen to some stories that you might not have heard yet. It's a huge part of how we connect. If we go on to the next slide, there's been a wealth of resilience research that's coming out now over the last period, particularly in organisations that I've been sort of reading about. I love this question here: are your relationships broad and deep enough to help support you? So again, think about each day, just incremental gains. What are you doing to broaden and deepen those relationships that you have in small but important ways? And it's the interactions. If we look at the next slide, it's the interactions themselves that are important, not just how many people you know on LinkedIn, but actually, the quality of interaction. So let's think quality much more rather than quantity. When we're thinking about, have I had a successful day, not how much have I done, but how well did I do it? How did I connect with the people? We always have a to-do list that we haven't finished at the end of the day, and we can beat ourselves up against that. Or we can think, what, the mindset I brought to what I was doing today, was really helpful for most of it. And this is how I'm going to shift it slightly tomorrow. I've really supported others around me. That's a massive achievement in a day, to be part of creating that environment. These are the things that I want to make sure we review in how have we had a good day and have we had a good week, and not beat ourselves up against, some of the things that we can't control, or just a sense of there's so much to do that overwhelms us. Thinking about the quality of our interactions and who there is who supports us. So if we go on to the next slide, who's in your support team? Now, you can make this up in any way you kind of want, but I've just put some there. We need to have different things that come from the relationships. We need to have people who are linking us to others. We need to have some that inspire us. We need to have some who are just, always there and listen to us and in our corner all the time. The friend, the champion, the challenger. Who's that person who stretches your thinking when you've got a little bit lazy or got a little bit fixed about thinking? Again, who's that person that challenges and helps you to get back into a growth mindset again? So, thinking about that kind of the quality and the variety that you have to make sure that those connections are meaningful and helpful, and that social support you have is, varied and quality enough. And, just little by little, we're building that up throughout our lives, and people change and people come and go, but all the time thinking, am I really getting some different, all those different needs that I have? What are the needs that I have from people, and how can I shift that in a small way? So if we move on to the sort of final piece about the next slide of health and well-being, we all know these things. I use the SEEDS acronym to kind of think about, the key areas of sleep and exercise. Eating well, drinking water is so important, and that switching off piece. So, again, you've come this afternoon to join this. Just have a little bit of a reflection for yourself. Which of those are you investing in? Which might you invest just a little bit more in? Some of these don't take a lot of time. They can all be done. A moment of mindfulness can help us to recover and switch off from the stresses we're under. Water's around us to drink if we want to, and we need it in order just to be kind of well and healthy. So just again, small wins, a little bit of a check. What else can you do that will help you to survive? So it's all about small wins. That's kind of the thing that's always been a theme of whether it's a diplomatic negotiation going on over kind of days and weeks and months sometimes, or whether it's training over years for Olympics. It's about those small wins every day, and right up to the end of my kind of final Olympics in Athens, even during that week, we were still working on small gains that we could make each day. We had a poor opening race in our Olympics, and sat down with our coach after our heat that we'd lost, and said, look, we've got 5 days. what are the things that we can do in order to improve? And we went out morning and afternoon, just short half-an-hour sessions around racing in order to continue to move, to put our oars in the water one frame quicker. You can't visually see it, but on the slow motion video camera, we know we needed to gain some speed. We worked on all of these small things day in, day out as a team, really committed to each other to see what difference we could make. And over the next 5 days, we won the next race to qualify for the final and found ourselves in the final. Those 5 days were a kind of microcosm of what had happened over the previous sort of 4 years, or even over the previous 10 years of my career. And we had a mantra through that week and through the year before that. We'd had injuries, we'd had all sorts of challenges along the way. But on the final slide, we had a kind of mantra of saying, don't focus on what's wrong, but just ask what's possible. And I wonder if that's maybe a useful phrase. For me, it keeps me in a resilient mindset, maybe a useful phrase to kind of continue and take with you the rest of today and hereafter, and to be thinking about, what's possible in the incredible opportunities you have to change people's lives for the better, and for yourself to keep developing your resilience by small margins, day in, day out. Great. If there's any kind of quick questions, I'm happy to take those, but otherwise, thank you very much for joining. Thank you for all you do in your work and incredible contribution that you've all been making to our country over the last period. And I feel very humbled and honoured to be able to share some thoughts and experiences with you today.